Ok, teníamos problemas técnicos resueltos, perdonen lo que escucharon, menos mal que no hablamos malo. Acaba de empezar el Congreso de los Estados Unidos con su vista. Recuerde que esto supone que hubiera sido una vista que se estuviera haciendo todo el cuatrienio. Para mí lo impresionante es que de nuevo, ahora, a unos 40 días de las elecciones, vamos a hacer unas vistas para ahora a ver si fiscalizamos a LUMA y generales del Congreso cuando esto debió haber estado ocurriendo desde hace todo el cuatrenio. O sea, recuerde que tú puedes solicitar vistas de estos subcomités, de estas subcomisiones, mensualmente, bimensualmente, trimestralmente, y exigir rendición de cuentas semanalmente, bisemanalmente, con supinas, con requerimientos de información, etcétera. O sea, para eso tenemos una comisionada residente. Se supone que para investigar, ¿verdad? Y para pedir y exigir rendición de cuentas, porque tú consigues los chavos, pues tienes que buscar que se implemente. Así que acaba de empezar el subcomité. Vamos a darle cobertura especial hoy a este comité del subcomité de la Comisión de Recursos Naturales, que es donde se ven los casos de Puerto Rico, específicamente del subcomité de asuntos indígenas. Básicamente donde están asuntos indígenas y los territorios, ahí está Puerto Rico. Arrancamos y ya mismito vamos a ver, ¿verdad? El show de la comisionada residente y demás, político, porque en mi opinión todo esto debe haber estado pasando recurrentemente durante los pasados años, todo el cuatrienio, para exigir rendición de cuentas, que GENERA y LUMA estuvieran al día. Desgraciadamente eso no ocurrió y el país está en las circunstancias que está. Y ahora LUMA se va, ahora, cuando pudieron haber estado haciendo esto con mucha premura todo el tiempo. Vamos a ver la vista y estaremos aquí para analizarla con ustedes.
Can see our first panel today has empty chairs as the administration witnesses refuse to show up to address this incredibly important issue. We had hoped that their testimony would help us better understand the federal government's efforts in Puerto Rico and how the over $20 billion in obligated taxpayer dollars are being spent on the island. Troublingly, the Biden-Harris administration has pushed an energy agenda on the island focused on building unreliable energy sources such as wind and solar, while ignoring the need for reliable and affordable baseload energy sources to meet the island's basic needs. Their radical approach is neither feasible nor sustainable and disregards the basic needs of the island's more than 3 million residents. I am particularly disappointed in the lack of participation from FEMA and the DOE. When declining the invitation to testify, the DOE stated that their, quote, senior leaders on Puerto Rico matters remain at a critical juncture with starting installations of solar panels and batteries in Puerto Rico. It is hard to believe that not a single person is available to testify across an entire federal department. FEMA responded to this committee by stating that they are not willing to testify if the DOE is not. Quite mature in their response. Given the fact that nearly 80% of the federal funds obligated for Puerto Rico come from FEMA, it is troubling that FEMA believes that they can sideline themselves on this issue. It is unacceptable that our invited witnesses from Washington, D.C. are unwilling to testify when all of our witnesses from Puerto Rico have traveled to be here with us today. The Biden-Harris administration's lack of participation in this hearing is yet another sign that while they may talk the talk, they are unwilling to walk the walk when it comes to helping the American people. Our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico and across the nation deserve better. Needless to say, we will be submitting questions for the record to the administration witnesses after this hearing. I want to thank the witnesses who have come before us today for traveling many miles to be here. I look forward to hearing from them on their ongoing work to rebuild Puerto Rico's electrical grid and the challenges that they have been facing. And I want to thank those of you who came to my office yesterday to provide me with additional information about the challenges that you have. I learned so much, and I'm extremely appreciative that you're all here today to address this important issue. All the stakeholders involved in rebuilding Puerto Rico's electrical grid must understand the importance of committing to addressing the issues that are raised here today. The residents of Puerto Rico deserve access to reliable, affordable, and resilient energy. Once again, I would like to thank our witnesses who are with us today, and I look forward to their testimony. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member for any statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. October 6, 2021. October 6, 2021. That day marks the first and only time to this day that the House Committee on Natural Resources held a hearing on the LUMA contract at the request of Ranking Member Grijalva and myself. It took this committee 2 long years to finally examine Puerto Rico's energy crisis. And in that time, the situation has only worsened. Puerto Rico endured the devastation of Hurricane Fiona and Tropical Storm Ernesto, the latter striking just last month. As a result, half of the island's energy consumers, or 750,000 households, were left in darkness. A full week after the storm, 40,000 people were still without power. The reliable, resilient, and clean energy future that LUMA promised Puerto Ricans has yet to materialize. It is shameful that this committee has chosen the last day on September's calendar, when many members are already flying back to their district to hold this critical hearing. And it's very nice to come and criticize the administration, but why we didn't have this hearing 6 months ago, a year ago, and use every tool at our disposal to compel the federal agencies to come before us. This is a convenient platform for certain members to feign interest in Puerto Rico's energy future. But let's be clear. Congress had ample time to question LUMA, GENERA, Core 3, and all other key players about what has happened with the over $21 billion allocated to repair and modernize the grid. Republicans are only addressing this now as the current Congress nears its end and are pushing a proposal to diversify Puerto Rico's energy sources. This so-called diversification plan could be construed as a path to keep Puerto Rico reliant only on fossil fuels and natural gas, ensuring that residents continue to pay 41% more for energy than the average U.S. consumer. Since these energy sources must be imported, their ability to lower kilowatt-hour prices is minimal. Moreover, this hearing is incomplete. Key agencies responsible for managing the grid's reconstruction, FEMA, the Department of Energy, and notably the Puerto Rico Public-Private Partnership Authority, P3, one of the few entities with oversight of LUMA, are not present. Despite these significant limitations, I hope today's hearing can still be productive. We need to understand how Congress can better support the restoration of Puerto Rico's grid moving forward. Above all, we must commit to achieving energy justice and reliability for the island. Puerto Ricans have suffered from long-standing government neglect, and it is time to break this cycle. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Chairman Westerman for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Hageman, for holding this hearing today, even though it's been scheduled and we were supposed to be here today. And because of votes, a lot of people have headed home, but it's great to see so many people have stuck around for the hearing because it is so important. It's of utmost importance for Puerto Rico as blackouts continue to affect the island residents. I want to take a moment to recognize my colleague, Representative Jenniffer González for requesting the hearing and for her tireless efforts representing the people of Puerto Rico in this committee and all throughout the halls of Congress. I also want to thank you, Chair Hageman, and my colleagues again for being here even with the change in schedule. Puerto Rico is still recovering from multiple disasters that have devastated the island. Hurricanes, tropical storms, and earthquakes have left long-lasting impacts on Puerto Rico, particularly its electrical grid. The fragility of the electrical grid and continued blackouts have affected the livelihoods of Puerto Rico's residents and the island's economy, and today's hearing is particularly salient as it is hurricane season. With the growing risk of powerful storms making landfall on the island, there are increasing concerns that a hurricane could collapse the island's electrical grid. In fact, last month, outages caused by Tropical Storm Ernesto resulted in approximately 750,000 customers losing power in Puerto Rico during the outage's peak. Fortunately, this storm did not become a severe hurricane when passing over the island. However, the incident, along with other significant blackouts, has made it clear that ensuring the resiliency of Puerto Rico's electrical grid is not an issue to be put off for tomorrow, but a challenge that needs to be addressed today, that should have been addressed long ago. Today, as we discuss the current state of Puerto Rico's electrical grid, I encourage our witnesses to promptly address the challenges and concerns raised not only in this hearing, but also by the residents of Puerto Rico. Residents' concerns regarding the underwhelming progress in modernizing the island's energy infrastructure should not be ignored. At the same time, I urge us all to look at this issue with an understanding that it is complex and can't really be traceable. We also must consider the practical realities on the island. It is abundantly clear to us that the Biden-Harris administration's prioritization of renewable energy over less costly, more reliable, and actually cleaner alternatives is not sustainable in Puerto Rico. Solar and wind have been proven to be less reliable, less resilient, and more costly than baseload sources such as natural gas. I want to take a moment to really express a sincere disappointment in the Biden administration's decision not to participate in this important hearing, even after all three of the invited departments were giving a month's notice. The lack of participation by the DOE, FEMA, and HUD cast serious doubt over the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to Puerto Rico and the millions of American citizens living on the island. Considering that much of the $21 billion obligated for federal assistance in Puerto Rico's energy reconstruction has not yet been dispersed, it is not surprising that the administration would want to avoid appearing before Congress. But to be clear, their absence today will not spare them from the oversight efforts of this committee. We will not allow the administration to run away from providing the information Congress needs to address the dire issue, and will be sending the administration witnesses written questions for them to answer on the record following the hearing. I was in Puerto Rico in a helicopter a few years ago, and as we were flying over, I kept seeing these transmission lines that it looked like there had never been a right-of-way because the trees were grown up right up under the lines. And I found out that the FEMA has authorized $1.2 billion to clear 16,000 miles of transmission lines, to clear the right-of-ways that should have been cleared and kept clean all along, which shows the utter disarray of the electrical grid when we can't even keep the right-of-ways clean. But 16,000 miles sounds like a lot. It's 100,000 acres when you look at an average 50-foot right-of-way. Some are wider, some are narrower. But it's $12,000 an acre is what FEMA is proposing to be spent to clear the right-of-ways. This is, it's shocking. And if I was them, I wouldn't come here either, because I don't think there's any way they can defend that. But I think it shows the absurdity of FEMA and the amount of money they're pouring into places and not getting the results out of it. I checked with, I had a meeting with some tribal forestry leaders, and I said, do you do right-of-way work? I said, yeah, we do that. I said, well, what does it cost? I said, it's expensive because you have to masticate the wood. I said, well, what does that cost? They said, it can get up to $1,000 to $1,200 an acre. I said, really? And they said, if it's really steep, it can be more than that. I said, well, what's the absolute most it should ever cost to do that? They said around $2,000 an acre. I said, that is high. And then they said, I said, well, what if FEMA were involved? And they just laughed and said, I'll multiply that by 5 or 6. 5 or 6 times the cost to do something just because we get one of these federal agencies involved. Something's got to change. The people of Puerto Rico deserve to have reliable electrical power, and the bureaucracy and the waste of money has to stop. And I hope this hearing sheds light on that. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Westerman. As the invited witnesses from the Biden-Harris administration chose not to appear before us today, we will move on to the second panel. And I invite the witnesses for our second panel to be seated at the witness table. While the clerk is resetting the table, I will introduce each of the witnesses who will be testifying today. Mr. Manuel Laboy Rivera, Executive Director for the Central Office for Recovery, Reconstruction, and Resiliency from San Juan, Puerto Rico. Mr. Antonio Torres Miranda, the Associate Commissioner with the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau from San Juan, Puerto Rico. Mr. Juan Saca, the Chief Executive Officer for LUMA Energy from San Juan, Puerto Rico. And Mr. Brandon McElmurray, the Chief Executive Officer for GENERA PR LLC from San Juan, Puerto Rico. If you would all join us at the table, that would be wonderful. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the talk button on the microphone, and we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute left, the light will turn yellow, and at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow all witnesses on the panel to testify before the members begin their questioning. The chair now recognizes Mr. Laboy Rivera for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Harriet Hageman, Vice Chair Jenniffer González, and members of the subcommittee, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on Puerto Rico's recovery and the critical efforts to rebuild our electrical grid. I am Manuel Laboy, Executive Director of the Central Office for Recovery, Reconstruction, and Resiliency, and the authorized representative of the Governor of Puerto Rico. As you are aware, the U.S. Government Accountability Office has determined that the recovery from Hurricanes Irma and Maria has been the largest and most complex in our nation's history. After this storm struck in 2017, it took almost a year and $1.9 billion of FEMA emergency funding to power and fully restore electric service in Puerto Rico. This was just the beginning of a unique and unprecedented long-term recovery. In 2019, FEMA implemented for the first time an accelerated award strategy known as FAST, resulting in a $9.5 billion obligation in September 2020 to build back better and more resilient our electrical infrastructure. However, this obligation effectively acted as a master recovery budget, since FAST did not authorize any construction activity or disbursement of funds. In order to do that, scopes of work must be submitted to FEMA to conduct an environmental and historic preservation review and approve additional funding to finance hazard mitigation measures. Once the scope of work is obligated, the project is then authorized for construction and allows Core 3 to process requests for disbursements. Furthermore, FEMA operates on a reimbursement model. To address liquidity issues, Core 3, with FEMA's approval, launched the Working Capital Advance Program in June 2022. This program provides a 25% cash advance for approved permanent work, up to 75% of the federal share, expediting the pace of recovery. This has been highlighted by FEMA as an example of innovation in the field. Up to 2021, there were 0 projects approved for the electrical grid, 0. Since then, there have been 189 projects duly approved for construction and disbursement worth $5.8 billion. Thanks to the working capital advance, about $1.3 billion have been disbursed. This represents 26% of the $5.8 billion that FEMA has authorized to do the reconstruction of the electrical grid. On January 2023, FEMA implemented the island-wide benefit cost analysis, allocating $6.8 billion of hazard mitigation funds, increasing the total estimated funding to $16.3 billion. In March 2023, FEMA notified Core 3 that vegetation clearance around critical infrastructure is an eligible hazard mitigation activity. In parallel, Core 3 has been actively engaging with LUMA, GENERA, FEMA, DOE, among other key stakeholders to accelerate the execution of those critical projects. Consequently, as indicated by the GAO and FEMA, we have made real progress. Nevertheless, certain challenges persist, and further steps are needed to sustain the momentum of our recovery. We urge Congress to take a deeper view and consider statutory and regulatory changes to remove unnecessary red tape at the federal level related to environmental and historic preservation requirements that will expedite the review and approval process. Also, to rationalize and simplify the administrative framework to manage multiple simultaneous declared disasters in a more efficient manner. To also retroactively apply policies that will benefit the recovery process, and to allow FEMA to increase fixed cost estimates on obligated funding under Section 428 due to severe inflation, construction material cost increases, and labor shortages. In conclusion, while we have made meaningful progress, certainly much more needs to be done. Core 3 is committed to ensuring compliance, transparency, and efficiency in managing federal funds, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration with FEMA and Congress to rebuild our electrical system in order to provide reliable, affordable, baseload, resilient energy to the people of Puerto Rico. Thank you for your time and attention, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. The chair now recognizes Mr. Torres Miranda for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Hageman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Antonio Torres Miranda, and I am an Associate Commissioner of the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau. On behalf of the Energy Bureau, I appreciate the opportunity to present our review regarding the challenges facing Puerto Rico's electrical system and the steps the Energy Bureau is taking to address these challenges. The Energy Bureau is an independent and specialized body that regulates, monitors, and enforces the Puerto Rico energy public policy. This is a responsibility that is not filled by any other entity in Puerto Rico. Recent events highlight our ongoing challenges, such as the outages that occurred in June of this year. These events highlight the fragility of our electrical infrastructure and the urgent need for the comprehensive improvements. In early June of this year, a major outage occurred at the Santa Isabel Transmission Substation, affecting customers in the municipalities of Santa Isabel, Cuamo, and Ay Bonito. On June 12, Puerto Rico experienced another large-scale outage affecting over 300,000 customers. The Energy Bureau immediately launched formal investigations into each of these events. We engaged the Electric Power Research Institute to serve as the independent technical lead in these investigations, ensuring our analysis is based on current industry codes and standards and best practices. We are committed to thoroughly addressing the root causes of these outages and preventing them from reoccurring. The Energy Bureau is also addressing the lack of available generation, which is another significant cause of the rolling blackouts Puerto Rico is experiencing. The Energy Bureau initiated a docket through which it ordered LUMA, PREPA, and GENERA to develop priority stabilization plans. Such plans are to be incorporated improvements to the electrical system within a period of the next 2 years. The review process for these plans includes technical conferences and public hearings. The objectives are to mitigate rolling blackouts and for utility consumers to receive adequate electrical services. Despite ongoing efforts to reform Puerto Rico's electrical system, including the transmission to private operators such as LUMA and GENERA, we face several persistent issues. Vegetation management remains a critical concern. More than half of our outages are vegetation-related. We are requiring frequent updates from LUMA regarding the federally funded $1.2 billion island-wide vegetation management reset initiative that is currently underway. Repairing baseload generators and increasing the resource adequacy of the bulk power system to meet industry reliability standards are short-term solutions to ensure customer service availability. Federal funding is essential to advance any other temporary generation required to ensure customer service availability, but the electrical system is brought to an acceptable level of reliability. PREPA's ongoing bankruptcy, in place since 2017, complicates long-term planning and investments. Its resolution is crucial for restoring access to capital markets and focusing on operational improvements. Puerto Rico's goal is an electrical system that is reliable, resilient, sustainable, and affordable for all its citizens. This includes integrating resources of renewable and non-renewable energy sources to meet the immediate need for improving resource adequacy and diminishing rolling blackouts. It also includes the targeted repair of generating plants in conjunction with a critical replacement program that seeks to reduce the likelihood that when a failure is repaired, this failure will reoccur. The Energy Bureau recognizes that achieving this vision requires more than technical solutions. It demands a holistic approach that considers Puerto Rico's social and economic realities. This will ensure a just and equitable transition that create opportunities for local workforce development and economical growth. In conclusion, the Energy Bureau will ensure completion of an ongoing transformation of the Puerto Rico electric system with continued support from Congress and our federal partners. Thank you for your concern and attention to this critical matter affecting more than 3 million American citizens. I stand ready to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres Miranda. And I now recognize Mr. Saka for 5 minutes of testimony.
Good morning. My name is Juan Saka. I'm the CEO at LUMA. With me today is Mario Hurtado, LUMA's Chief Regulatory Officer, and Juan Rodriguez, who is our transformational lead for the Puerto Rico grid. I would like to thank the Chairman Westerman and Subcommittee Chair Hegman, Ranking Member Fernandez, and members of the subcommittee for the invitation to appear before you today and discuss our progress in building a more reliable and resilient energy system for Puerto Rico, as well as the challenges LUMA continues to face as a result of decades of neglect by the previous utility operator, as it has been stated, combined with damages from Hurricane Maria and frequent powerful storms due to the effects of more extreme weather. As many of you know, LUMA took over as the transmission and distribution operator of Puerto Rico's electric grid in June 2021, only 4 years following the devastating impacts of Hurricane Maria, a storm that took the island's entire energy grid offline and left customers in the dark for months, 11 months. Even before Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico's electric grid was well below utility reliability standards. The entire system was also allowed to deteriorate due to the financial mismanagement, eventually resulting in a $10 billion bankruptcy in 2017, which today remains unresolved. While the over 4,000 LUMA team members, of whom I'm very proud of for the work that they're doing, continue to make progress across multiple areas to build a better energy future for our 1.5 million customers, the impact of past failures, which predate LUMA, remain an enduring challenge to process, which we are working incredibly hard to overcome. Reflecting that determination that we have to improve, our team works every day to replace aging and failing infrastructure that was neglected for decades with new reliable equipment. These are long-term reliability investments, not quick fixes, and making the necessary structural changes is a monumental and time-consuming task, but we're making significant progress. To date, we have replaced over 17,850 utility poles, which on the average take about 6 to 8 hours to replace per pole, with new poles able to withstand 160-mile-per-hour winds and installed over 9,000 automated devices to reduce the duration and impact of outages, which have already prevented over 140 million interruptions minutes. That number has been updated to 170 million minutes, thankfully. The impact of this has been real. Over the last year, more than 95% of customers had concurrent service more than 98% of the time, this is in the last year, when generation was available. In addition to our day-to-day improvement efforts, LUMA has also initiated 460 critical projects to FEMA, representing $12.3 billion in federal funding, with 171 approved and 87% of those, or 149 projects already in construction or completed. Progress is being made. A significant achievement of its own, considering PREPA did not move one capital project to construction, as Mr. Laboy mentioned earlier today. LUMA is utilizing all available federal programs to fund capital projects across Puerto Rico, but securing effective FEMA funding takes time. We will continue to work together with our partners at FEMA, DOE, Core 3, and others who are committed to providing these critical resources for the Puerto Rico energy grid. Thanks to their support, LUMA has recently launched 2 major federally funded initiatives, which, when complete, will significantly improve service for our customers. The first initiative is a historic multi-year island-wide vegetation safety and reliability initiative, which will clear, and I repeat, clear vegetation from over 16,000 miles of power lines and reduce outages by up to 45% once complete. Our vegetation management team continues to remove hazardous trees and brush as part of our daily operations, and to date have cleared more than 5,000 miles of power lines. The second initiative is the Smart Meter Initiative to replace 1.5 million smart meters across Puerto Rico, and new technology that will help detect outages faster, enable a more timely response when they occur, and improve customer service. Even as historic progress is being made by LUMA, we want to be very clear about challenges that remain. Enduring issues around generation persist for the island's energy producers, in large part, and I repeat, in large part, because of a legacy of failures. The infrastructure will take time to modernize. This is and will be a multi-year transformation that will require even greater cooperation with local federal partners, including members of this committee, who we hope will work with us to address these legacy challenges to help advance critical FEMA funding. We have specific requests for you that I will make during our conversation. In closing, LUMA is committed to Puerto Rico. Our team is committed to Puerto Rico. I'm very proud of them. We will complete this transformation. We will get the job done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Saka, and I now recognize Mr. McElmurray for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak before this committee on behalf of GENERA PR. My name is Brandon McElmurray, and I have the pleasure of serving as the CEO and president of GENERA. First, I want to emphasize that the entire GENERA team understands the significant responsibility we undertake every day, which is to generate reliable, affordable energy for the people of Puerto Rico. We take this responsibility seriously. Electricity is an essential service without which modern life does not work, economies do not grow, and real people are not able to realize their God-given potential. We appreciate the opportunity to share our objectives and to provide an update on our progress to this honorable committee. GENERA's mission is to generate reliable, affordable energy to Puerto Rico. We understand that this is critical for both economic development and quality of life on the island. GENERA was founded in the wake of Hurricanes Maria and Fiona, 2 of the deadliest storms to hit Puerto Rico in recent memory. After learning firsthand of Puerto Rico's energy needs and the damage that these storms wrought to Puerto Rico's electric grid, GENERA took over the operation and management of PREPA's existing generation assets to improve their capacity and resilience. This means that GENERA manages electricity generation, which is the process of creating energy, whether that be by fossil generation, solar power, or wind turbines. Energy transmission is distinct from generation. Transmission is the process of transporting energy from these generation sites to where it's needed most. GENERA is made up of a team of seasoned executives and partners with extensive global and local power, fuel, and operation experience. I am proud to say that our management team, most of them were born in Puerto Rico, raised, educated, and are deeply committed to the communities that we serve. Collectively, we have direct experience with every single type of power plant technology that PREPA owns across the fleet. If I can speak personally, my background is in engineering. I'm a proud engineering graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and I've spent over 2 decades working in the energy sector. As both an engineer and an executive, I have expertise in leading companies in the energy transition space. I bring that expertise to GENERA, and my team and I are deeply committed to stabilizing Puerto Rico's energy grid and delivering reliable, affordable energy to the people of Puerto Rico. At GENERA, we started operating PREPA's legacy thermal generation fleet on July 1st, 2023, just over a year ago. This fleet is made up of approximately 60% of generating capacity connected to the Puerto Rican grid. Independent thermal power producers, renewable energy providers, and publicly owned hydroelectric resources provide roughly 40% of that capacity. When GENERA inherited administration of the PREPA fleet, we took over a set of generation assets that were roughly 30 years older than the electricity power average in the United States. And issues related to age and general obsolescence of the fleet continue to persist today. Over the last year, we have worked tirelessly to provide electric generation service with fewer interruptions, which we know is necessary to ensure that every family on the island has access to reliable power. But let me say this, the work that we have done is not enough and can be improved, and every Puerto Rican deserves access to power. When structuring our operation and maintenance contract, we built it around 4 key priorities that we believe will improve and stabilize the electric generation system for all of Puerto Rico. First, we aim to improve reliability of power availability throughout the island through continuous upgrades to the current fleet. Ensuring reliable power is fundamental to the success of GENERA, and we understand the importance of improving generation system reliability. Our team at GENERA has developed and implemented an electric system stabilization plan to ensure the continuous, reliable generation of energy in tandem with the integration of renewable energy resources. Since we inherited the fleet, we have increased availability of generation capacity, and we are working steadily to deliver our plans to further increase capacity and improve reliability. GENERA also hopes to utilize federal funds to expand the island's temporary supplemental generation reserves in coordination with FEMA, DOE, and the Army Corps of Engineers. This step will provide additional capacity to the system. One possible way to help Puerto Rico immediately is to access the current $5 billion METEN contract that U.S. Army Corps has in place to serve Puerto Rico and provide electrical power. As this committee is aware, after Hurricane Fiona, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers installed 17 generators at Palo Seco and San Juan, and collectively those generators produced 350 megawatts of power, providing enough power to meet the needs of 100,000 homes. Without these generators today, there would be Puerto Ricans that had no power. These generators were installed in 120 days and provide an example of what can be done when we work in concert. Second, GENERA's contract ensures that our priorities are aligned with Puerto Rico's. Our fee structure largely relies on a 50-50 share with the government of Puerto Rico in savings and cost efficiencies generated. We agree to this because we are confident that our contract is primarily based on the performance that we execute every day. And I'm happy to say that in fiscal year 2024, we have generated over $100 million in savings for the ratepayers of Puerto Rico. Third, GENERA appreciates and supports Puerto Rico's transition to renewable energy and the projected influx of federal funding, an aligned public policy, and the commitment of engaged public and private stakeholders. In support of this essential transition, we treat the task of retiring and decommissioning antiquated power plants as they are replaced by renewables as a key component of our strategy, adhering to the approvals in the Integrated Resource Plan. We look forward to working closely with the PREB to ensure that there are adequate generation sources available and that plants are retired responsibly. Supporting and being part of Puerto Rico's transition to renewables is one of the main reasons why we founded GENERA. We look forward to closely working with all stakeholders involved to ensure this transition is done efficiently and effectively. Last, but certainly not least, having an energy business in Puerto Rico and working closely with PREPA plan employees over the last several years, we have come to recognize the invaluable talent and dedication of PREPA's plant operators. They work incredibly hard and ensure that Puerto Rico's legacy power plants continue to operate. And let me emphasize, these plants and the service that we provide could not be possible without the 733 employees that we have every day and the folks that come in 24/7, 365 to make these assets work. Finally, I want to reiterate that we understand just how important this undertaking is to provide an essential service to the Puerto Rican people, and GENERA is committed to continually improving the limited set of assets under its control. But this alone will not be enough to achieve the broader system results that the island needs and customers deserve. With the assistance of FEMA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on temporary supplemental generation projects, we can quickly improve the resiliency and redundancy of the Puerto Rico's electric grid to ensure we can bridge the gap between the current fleet and the future of a reliable, affordable, clean energy generation that GENERA is working towards. We look forward to building a meaningful relationship with you and a brighter future for the Puerto Rican people. We are here to cooperate and provide the committee all the information that it needs so that we can work together to resolve issues which are extremely important to the daily lives of Puerto Ricans. We are confident we can work together to ensure that this is a successful energy system transformation that we can all be proud of the role we played in it. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes of questioning. My questions are first going to be directed to Mr. Saka and Mr. McElmurray. LUMA took over operations and maintenance of PREPA's transmission and distribution system in 2021, and GENERA took over the operation and maintenance of PREPA's thermal generation asset in 2023. Would you please, starting with you, Mr. Saka, would you please describe the challenges your respective companies inherited from PREPA?
Challenges are many. First of all, it's an aging system that is on the average 32 years older than the average system. That means that replacing that equipment on a yearly basis, on a daily basis, is a very important matter, and it is actually still the cause of many of the outages that we have today, which is, failing equipment. That's one. Another one is vegetation. Vegetation is I would say, in the short term, the number one problem that we have to reduce outages. That is more than 50% of outages come from vegetation. The challenge with that is that we have 16,000 miles of vegetation that has to be cleared. 16,000 miles. I think you can go around the earth about, 2/3, and I mean, it's just a massive undertaking. The interesting part of this is that it is owned, the rights of way are owned by PREPA. And we estimate that this will take 3 years to do, in other words, the clearing. And I want to make sure that we understand clearing, and, we're talking about having the clearing of all of the vegetation under the lines. And that is so important so that, when there is wind and when there is rain, it won't get impacted. And 3 years is a long time. I was there for Maria. People of Puerto Rico lost patience after Maria. The people of Puerto Rico now have lost tolerance for what's going on for so many years. And so, vegetation clearing is most important, and we can have a more deep discussion.
I'm going to follow up with you on that particular issue, but Mr. McElmurray, if you would just please very briefly describe some of the challenges that you inherited from PREPA.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, thank you, Congresswoman, for your question. And first, I want to acknowledge how difficult it is to be without electricity. The practical aspect of this can't be overlooked. Food spoils, medicine goes bad, kids can't go to school, businesses don't work. It's an intolerable situation, and I think in modern life, it's one of the worst things that can happen. With respect to your question, I would say there are 3 things. First of all is age. Just for context, the Puerto Rico electrical system today relies on power plants that were built before this country put a man on the moon. So we are relying on a set of equipment that is far beyond its useful life. The age of the generation fleet is over 40 years, which means essentially it was built in the first term of Ronald Reagan, given, the form we're in today. And you see degradation, fatigue, cracks, corrosion, obsolete tech that are all the contributors to lack of availability. The second thing is lack of capital investment. So it's one thing to have old stuff. It's a second thing not to maintain it. Because of the financial issues and the choices that have been made over the last 20 to 25 years, there's been a lack of maintenance into these old facilities, which contributes just to the accelerated decline. And then the third is the effects of renewables. Renewables are an amazing technology. I have 3 children, and I hope one day,
Terribly
into the
expensive and
future-
terribly inefficient as well.
And hopefully one day, given the public policy of Puerto Rico, that's where the grid goes. But I would say that given the technology that exists, those renewables put an incredible amount of stress on the type of technology that's installed. And so not only is it old, but it's the wrong type of technology, and it hasn't been maintained. So those are the 3 contributing factors that really, get to the point, which is the availability of reliable generation is not where it needs to be. And the only way to really address the problem is to create additional reliable generation.
So one of the things that I heard yesterday from everyone that I visited with in my office is the challenges associated with red tape. For example, NEPA and having to comply with NEPA and some of the historical preservation requirements that you have. Would every one of you agree that NEPA and the historical preservation obligations that you have been one of the primary challenges associated with providing reliable and affordable electricity to the Puerto Rican citizens? Yes? You would all agree with that?
An absolute yes.
Okay. So one of the things we need to look at is whether we need to make some fundamental changes to NEPA and the historical preservation, or we're going to continue being unable to provide electricity to the citizens of Puerto Rico. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'm going to call on Mr. Torres for 5 minutes of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you. The people of Puerto Rico have been deprived of affordable and reliable energy to an extent, on a scale and at a length that would be tolerated nowhere else in the United States, nowhere else. Puerto Rico is in a state of emergency. And so my first question for Genera is what can be done immediately to generate more power for Puerto Rico and to prevent more outages?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. To your point, the people in Washington, D.C. can expect to be without power for 1 day in 10 years. The people in Puerto Rico can expect to be without power for 2 days every month.
We know the problem. What can be done immediately to solve the problem?
From Genera's perspective, we believe that what can be done now is we need to install 560 megawatts of temporary generation, that it's the same type of project that was done by FEMA to install the 350 megawatts. With 560 megawatts of additional generation, we believe that provides enough capacity to get the load loss day down to acceptable standards.
And how long would that take?
The Army Corps has just done this project and took them 120 days to install those power plants. There's an Army Corps contract available today that can be activated. So I think it's fair to say that in 120 days from the word go, you could implement such a solution.
Okay, is there anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Most of the outages in Puerto Rico may be attributable to vegetation. LUMA, how long will it take to clear the vegetation?
At this point, we're estimating 3 years and more.
And of the 3 years,
At this point, 3 years and possibly more, unfortunately.
and of the 3 years, how much of the 3 years is the physical process of vegetation clearance, and how much is the process of regulatory approval?
The regulatory approval, and especially on the environmental side, is at least 1 year of that,
So of the 3 years, 1 relates to regulatory approval.
at least.
So the regulatory approval slows down the process of vegetation clearance by 50%.
Yes.
And I just feel like the fact that we're allowing red tape to be prioritized over the energy needs of the people on the island to be an absurdity. and it would be comical if it were not so serious and not so dangerous. And the vegetation clearance could be delayed not only by regulatory approvals, but also by environmental review.
That is correct. If I may be blunt with this committee, I mean, the number one thing that you can do is provide a waiver on very few things because, you know, it's just what the priorities are. One of them is vegetation. Today,
And I'm asking about environmental review. So there's an environmental impact statement and an environmental assessment. How much longer would the process be with an environmental assessment?
So an environmental assessment can take 8 months to a year and more.
And what about an environmental impact statement?
That could take up to 5 years.
So 3 plus 5 years. It could take 8 years to clear vegetation, which is central to preventing outages. Is that what you're telling me?
I know of cases where it could take 10 years and another case 20 years from some people who have been in this for a while in the industry.
Again, I think that's outrageous. Like, it's not, removing vegetation should not be rocket science. Like, if we know that vegetation is a disproportionate driver of outages, we should be creating an expedited process by which to remove it. I just think that it's common sense. What matters, obviously, is not only the quantity, but also the quality of energy, the reliability of energy. One measure of reliability is the rate of forced outages. Genera, what is the forced outage rate for Puerto Rico?
Today, the forced outage rate on the existing assets is approximately 30%, which means a third of the time they're unexpectedly unavailable.
And how does Puerto Rico's forced outage rate compare to forced outage rates elsewhere in the United States?
A comparable utility, let's say, for example, in Florida, it would be 3%, so it's 10 times as severe.
And, you know, much has been said about unreliable energy. I think the most unreliable energy is oil. Like, what percentage of Puerto Rico's energy is coming from oil?
Yep. Thank you, Congressman, for your question. Of the fleet that we manage, approximately 50% of the electricity is derived from oil.
Whereas Florida is?
Probably less than 3.
Right. So I think that there's obviously a connection between Puerto Rico's dependency on oil and the high rate of forced outages.
Absolutely, as well as the high rate of power prices generally.
Okay.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Lamalfa for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and pleased to see this hearing today. I did have a visit to Puerto Rico a while back and saw the facilities, and we keep hearing the stories on the power shortages. In my area, we call them shutoffs. We frequent them a lot up in Northern California due to part of it's forestry, and so I was very pleased that we were able to include in Chairman Westerman's Fix Our Forest bill an advancement on clearing around power lines, clearing around power lines, which you desperately need there. I'm trying to streamline, make those projects simpler to do, and help with what should be a simple thing, and not be caught up in so much red tape. So I'm very excited to see, having seen the facilities, generation facilities that PREPA has let go and is letting GENERA and LUMA do the good work you're trying to do. So I appreciate that and stand ready to help however I can as part of this committee. So I would like to yield my time to my good friend and colleague, Ms. Gonzalez-Colon.
Thank you, Congressman Lamalfa, and I want to say thank you, Chair Hageman and Chairman Westerman, for holding this critical hearing regarding Puerto Rico. And I'll say critical because the continuing instability of the electrical grid is a roadblock to our economic development on the island. And it's a threat to the public safety and to the mental and physical health of my constituents as well. Even though the House has canceled votes today and members have left for their districts, Mr. Chairman, you have demonstrated your commitment to the island and our residents by keeping this hearing at schedule, all while others are more interested in photo ops and a good headline. I also want to thank Chair Hageman and my colleagues who are here today, even when votes are not called. The Committee on Natural Resources is the committee with jurisdiction over Puerto Rico and the rest of the U.S. territories. Refusing to testify at this hearing is a clear disregard, not just to the committee, or to me as the only member representing the island, elected from the island in U.S. Congress, but also, more important, to my constituents. We will have preferred to have Secretary Granholm here, who was repeatedly invited to this hearing, to have made herself available to provide testimony at this hearing, whose intent is to oversee the federal funding that we in Congress have approved to several federal agencies that are illegally led by the Department of Energy, as the principal agency tasked with our nation's energy production and policies, to execute an action plan that guarantees reliable, safe, and affordable electricity on the island. And I am not the only one saying this. The President tasked the Secretary Granholm as the lead, personally, in Puerto Rico a few months ago in Ponce, and I was there as well. Subsequently, I must think that her willful and misguided decision to be absent from this hearing has caused to also have absences from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Federal Emergency and Management Agency, FEMA. This is an issue that must be treated with all the seriousness and urgency that it deserves from all public officials tasked with this matter, and all the energy sector stakeholders as well. I wish I could sit here and tell you it was an issue of the past, but it's not. And I will be lying to you. Hurricane Irma Maria in 2017 revealed the weak condition of the Puerto Rico's energy infrastructure. That's the reality. We suffered months of power outages in rural areas for almost a year. The earthquakes in the Southwest in 2020 reminded us that this tragic reality, as well as the daily outages my constituents continue to suffer. The reality is that 7 years later, blackouts and brownouts still affect our everyday life. That's the reality on the island. The system can barely meet demand, and any spike brings it down. This past month alone, we saw numerous outages affecting hundreds of thousands of customers for long hours, days, and days on end. You cannot run a business like this. You cannot have a stable and safe home like this. Schools, hospitals, every sector on the island is affected by the unpredictability of our electricity system. Our legacy plants are still being run to their limits and deferring maintenance, increasing the risk of failing before they can be replaced. The transmission and distribution system is still overloaded and missing basic redundancies in power lines. All that despite total obligations for recovery for almost $17 billion from different sources, including over $11 billion between FEMA and HUD for permanent rebuilding announced at the end of 2020. However, almost 4 years later, the most optimistic estimate from the government of Puerto Rico shows specific projects approved. Construction stage barely add up to 10% of the permanent work fund obligations. My time expired this time, but I will continue to raise the voice of the people of Puerto Rico in this committee. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you for your perspective as well. It's very important for this committee. The chair now recognizes Representative Ocasio-Cortez for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. I found a lot of the opening statements today quite interesting, but there are also some claims as well that I think are important to clear up. But before I go there, Mr. McElmurray, at an investors meeting held earlier this year, you stated that Puerto Rico's energy future will be, quote, powered by natural gas, supplemented by solar and batteries. But that statement in and of itself is in direct opposition to standing Puerto Rican law, which has policy to phase out fossil fuels and reach 100% generation from renewables by 2050. Why would GENERA tell its investors something that is so in contradiction with Puerto Rican standing law?
Well, first, Congresswoman, thank you very much for your question. GENERA's mandate is very clear. You know, we operate on an operation and maintenance agreement that has very prescribed responsibilities. The public policy and the rules, whether it be the IRP or other legislation in Puerto Rico is crystal clear about what the future will be. From our perspective in GENERA, one of our mandates is to reduce the cost of electricity. Today, with respect to the fleet that we operate, 50% of the electricity is generated by oil and 50% by gas. Of the dollars that it takes for us to operate the system,
I apologize, I just have very limited time. Are you getting to a point where basically, are you getting to, trying to, I think, drive at reducing costs as your rationale here?
Thank you for your question. What I was attempting to point out is, from GENERA's perspective, to reduce costs to ratepayers, we believe that we would like to see the oil go to zero. And for controllable resources, we believe that those should be run on gas or, quite frankly, hydrogen in the future, so the infrastructure be there.
And would that be blue hydrogen or green hydrogen?
I think what you would love to see is green hydrogen, to the extent that possibly the renewables may be available to produce it.
I'd like to reclaim my time. Apologies, I just have very limited allocation here. I would like to make sure that we clarify something for the record. One of the things that we heard in our opening statements is this claim that solar panels are, quote unquote, highly ineffective against severe weather. I would like to submit to the congressional record reporting from the Washington Post that actually outlines that against severe weather, solar panels are actually, in fact, do well in storms. And in fact, they outperform the existing T&D system associated with Puerto Rico's fossil fuel grid. Thank you very much. I think it's also important to note here that we have an existing contract with LUMA and Puerto Rico. As we move on here, Mr. Saka, LUMA's contract began in 2020, is that correct? Negotiations began in 2020?
LUMA started operations in June of 2021.
2021. Negotiations started in 2020 and it was signed in 2021?
The operation started in June of 2021, that is correct.
That was under then Governor Rosselló?
I believe so, yes.
The contract was extended in 2022?
What's happened is that one of the important items which hurts Puerto Rico in a major way today, and especially the consumer, is that PREPA is still not out of bankruptcy. So it was agreed that the contract would not officially start until PREPA exits bankruptcy, which was scheduled to have happened by today. So there is a temporary contract of, I don't know the exact details of how that was done because I was not there yet, but the contract actually begins when PREPA exits bankruptcy.
And that, to your estimation, is that an indefinite period at this point?
My understanding is that it will be at least one more year before that happens. And one of the things this committee really needs to understand, and for all of us to be on the same page, as the system requires more investment, PREPA is limited in going out to get financing so the customer's bill will not go up. Because a lot of the investment that should be taking place right now on the operational side, let's leave on the side FEMA funding. The utility is not able to do it because it has not exited bankruptcy, and that has a huge impact on our ability to execute and on our ability to go out and get financing so that the ratepayers' money is not impacted.
I apologize, just as a detailed clarification. So your assertion here is that the LUMA contract has not functionally began because PREPA has not yet exited bankruptcy?
It is one of the requirements in this temporary contract that the actual agreement does not begin until they exit bankruptcy.
Recognizes Chairman Westerman for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair Hageman, and thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Miranda, I believe you mentioned that one half of the power outages are caused by vegetation. I would associate myself with many of the questions from Mr. Torres. Mr. Luma, how many acres of right-of-way have been cleared in the past 5 years?
Since LUMA started in June of 2021, we had cleared 5,000 and distribution system. I make the distinction because this has nothing to do with the clearing project that FEMA has approved, which is critical for the immediate reduction of outages in Puerto Rico. We, LUMA, on a daily basis, are continuing to be as efficient and as effective as we can in clearing vegetation. So the answer to your question is 5,000 miles.
And you've got 16,000 miles to go.
Yes, sir.
So does anybody on the panel disagree with the statement that maybe the low-hanging fruit, the most expedient thing we could do is clear that vegetation as quickly as possible? Does anybody see a problem with that?
Absolutely.
And,
it is
but
the
you-
number one ask, sir.
But you also testified that it could take up to 10 years with environmental reviews if it ends up in an environmental impact statement. It seems to me that one of the most expedient things we could do would be to clear the way so that these power lines could be cleared very quickly and that vegetation removed. Mr. McElmurray, you said 50% of the energy comes from oil. If that 50% of energy were replaced with natural gas, what would the reduction in carbon emissions be?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. From a carbon standpoint, you would cut it in half, but I think, which is critical, but I think from an economic standpoint, you would save $1 billion.
So we save $1 billion for ratepayers, and we reduce Puerto Rico's carbon footprint from oil generation by 50%. That sounds like a pretty good scenario to me. Actually, in 2020, PREPA proposed replacing old fuel plants with a liquefied natural gas terminal and more gas plants. But PREB rejected this proposal in favor of solar and grid projects. Mr. Miranda, can you explain that?
Yeah, the IRP process, it's done by law, and it requires a process that has public participation and interveners. And besides the modeling that was done, those were the modifications that came out and was approved. And no party actually requested judicial or administrative reconsideration for that. So that's why it has been maintained as is. But besides the renewable project, the IRP, or the approved present IRP, also allows a natural gas, 300 megawatt natural gas. That would be a transition for the as the renewables would kick in. So we do have a natural gas project for that.
So you mentioned a 300 megawatt natural gas project. How large a site would that take, Mr. McElmurray, to build a 300 megawatt natural gas facility?
Thank you, Congressman. I apologize, I didn't hear the question.
How many acres would it take approximately to build a 300 megawatt natural gas facility?
Thank you for the question. From an acreage standpoint, probably a little under, probably 30.
30 acres. So you can put 300 megawatts in 30 acres. How many acres does it take to produce 1 megawatt of solar power? That's 10. I'll help you out. So if you wanted to get 300 megawatts of solar power, it takes 3,000 acres versus 30 acres for a natural gas plant to produce the same amount. Is constructible real estate easy to find on the island of Puerto Rico?
Thank you for your question. With respect to the project that is being mentioned on this panel, the acreage has been identified, and so there would be a viable site to do that. I think the issue, if I could just highlight it, would be one of time. To build a new combined cycle from the word go is probably a 36-month process in the U.S. Mainland, so Puerto Rico would probably be similar. In addition to that, you need time for financing as well as permit approvals. So you're talking about potentially a process that could take up to 7 years. And so once you decide that you want the infrastructure, the issue is not technological or capacity or in some ways financing, because you can figure that out. The issue is time. And so these resources take an incredible long time to get online.
So 3,000 acres for 30 or for 300 megawatts of solar power, 30 acres for 300 megawatts of natural gas, and we're not going to see any trees or vegetation growing where those solar panels are installed. It seems like common sense has left the discussion when it comes to clearing right-of-ways, the type of energy generation, and $21 billion for the electric system in Puerto Rico. That seems outrageous compared to what states spend on their electric grids. We've got to find a better way to do this, and this hearing, I think, is an important first step in that. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Westerman, and I agree with you. The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for holding this hearing. Mr. Saka, is it true that Puerto Ricans experience 4 additional hours of outages during fiscal year 2024, reflecting a 19% increase compared to the previous year?
I do not have the exact number, but certainly the outages are real, correct.
Okay. I guess that you haven't checked the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau's resolution, because that information is contained in the report. So is it also true that for the same fiscal year, LUMA saw a 17% increase in profit compared to fiscal year 2021?
An increase in what? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
A 17% increase in profit compared to fiscal year 2021.
In profit?
Yes.
We are the systems operator. It's important for everyone to understand that there is not there is a fee that is paid, and as a systems operator, if we save, let's say, $1 million, this is not something that goes, to the pocket of the owners of the grid.
I guess we should have a conversation with Mr. Torres Medina, Associate Commissioner, who can clarify on this information that has been made public by the Bureau. Mr. Saka, is LUMA working with FEMA and Fish and Wildlife proactively to ensure vegetation clearing progresses quickly?
Not fast enough.
We know that delays for environmental assessment and permits is often because agencies lack staff and resources. Would it be beneficial if Congress gave more resources?
100%, and I'll go further than that. This is a huge emergency in Puerto Rico, and the number one thing that the federal government can do is to provide some type of waiver responsibly so that we can do a safe job at accelerating. This is the number one short-term action that could be taken, because at this point, and I'll be happy to read to you the time frame that
Reclaiming
it's
my
taking.
time, what I'm trying to say is we cannot expect for the federal agencies to do the work at the speed that the people in Puerto Rico deserve when their budget has been cut dramatically. So we cannot expect more with less. That's the point that I'm trying to make here. Mr. Saka, it has surfaced that your company spends over $200 million a year on employees seconded from companies that are part of LUMA's consortium. 20% of these funds are used for lavish hotels, stays, allocation for themselves and their spouses. How can LUMA justify this exorbitant dollar amount while everyday Puerto Ricans have to almost weekly throw away their food from the fridge due to the constant outages?
In order to address the complex and massive challenge that LUMA faces as a result of everything that we've just discussed, we have personnel from inside of Puerto Rico and from outside of Puerto Rico that are necessary for the transformation. It is important to understand.
You're not going to answer my question. Madam Chair, I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter a letter from PREPA to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Saka, it is estimated that more than 5 gigawatts of solar capacity will be installed in Puerto Rico over the next 10 years, with only 8.8% coming from the utility scale segment. Do you consider the grid is equipped to absorb the growing number of households that will have solar and battery systems?
The answer is that it depends at the rate in which we're able to make progress in upgrading the grid.
So it's a yes or not?
It is, with all due respect, Madam, it is really not a yes or no answer. This is related specifically to how quickly we're able to upgrade the equipment, how quickly we're able to get reliability
Thank you.
up.
Reclaiming my time. Mr. Montgomery, would you please, you answer a question to Mr. Torres saying that you need to install more power plants, temporary power plants in Puerto Rico to achieve more capacity. So what is happening with this Aguirre plan? I checked today and it's out of service.
You may go ahead and answer.
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. First, let me say, Puerto Rican ratepayers and residents deserve better in terms of the reliability of the equipment. As to Aguirre, when I checked this morning coming into this hearing kind of on our operational system, I did see that they had an issue with one of the units. I would have to follow up to see exactly what happened after we walk out of here.
It's out, right? 200,000 people could get service out of that plan. Do you have any plan to have it functionally working? Is that part of your energy resiliency plans?
Yep. Thank you for your question. One of the key strategies of GENERA in the short term, which is something that can make an impact to Puerto Ricans today, not 10 years from now, is a critical component replacement program, which I think was mentioned on this panel. $126 million that is being invested in motors, pumps, boiler tubes, and other items that routinely break. The availability of Aguirre in 2022 was essentially zero. One of the big reasons that FEMA put in the program. It is a notoriously unreliable plant because of its age. But in terms of strategy, the most near-term strategy is to provide critical components and repairs to try to get the availability
Will you
up.
submit to this
We're
committee?
I'm going to call on Representative Radewagen. Thank you for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member, and Vice Chairman Gonzalez Colon for holding this hearing today. I wish to yield all of my time to Representative Gonzalez Colon.
Thank you, my friend. I've been hearing the questions of members of this committee. I believe everybody here are on the same page in terms of the contract of LUMA have not been serving the people of Puerto Rico. You got 1 year of a transitional contract, and then it got into effect. And meanwhile, the utility operators need to remember that you were contracted to provide better service and not excuses. And what I see here is that people of Puerto Rico already have it with LUMA. It's been a long time, and we have not seen any change. Actually, worse. Mr. Saka, you mentioned that waivers will speed up LUMA's work. To this date, what waivers do you already requested?
Specifically as it relates to environmental, as you know.
When do you submit those waivers?
Excuse me?
When do you submit those waivers?
We have not submitted.
You have not submitted any waivers to any federal or state agency,
Federal.
but you did not.
We have not
You
submitted
have not.
a request
So
for any
you're
waivers.
asking for waivers here, but you have not submitted or requested any official waiver, and that's your answer. What permits has LUMA requested from federal agencies that are currently pending, and when did LUMA request it?
So at this point, we have submitted for pending obligation 217 projects, and LUMA continues on a daily basis to work with the different
Which
agencies.
permits you submitted already?
So we have submitted multiple permits that are associated specifically with each
Madam
project.
Chair, I will ask the witness to submit to the committee a list of the permits that LUMA has requested or filed during the term. You have had 3 years, correct?
LUMA started June of 2021.
And it's 2024. So you do the math. You've been 3 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you told us here in 2021 that you were already ready on day one, but you were not. And I don't think you're going to be ready in 1,000 years. The reality here is that you have never begun your process in the island. I think just last month you went to PREP to ask to have customers pay a rate increase to cover up an upward revision on capital expenditures to $200 million from $110 million that the PREP House had already approved. And I want to ask you, Mr. Saka, exactly why should the customers give more money to an operator who is not delivering on what the people of Puerto Rico contracted you for?
The first obligation that LUMA received was in May of 2022. Progress has been made since then. I have, 7 very specific items that I can mention. One of them is the
Why the customer should give you more money if you have not delivered?
I believe that, as mentioned earlier, there is a need for investment on the operational side to keep up with reliability. That's a fact from an industry perspective. The fact that PREPA has not exited bankruptcy is a huge problem because the people of Puerto Rico should not be paying for an increase as it should be financed by going to the markets.
Mr. Saka, to the questions of Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you were saying that because PREPA is not out of the bankruptcy situation, you technically can do whatever you want. That was my impression of your answer. So how come LUMA is constantly going to PREP to ask for more? When you enter a contract, not knowing what you really need to operate, you knew the condition of the system, you knew the situation of PREPA, you knew the situation after the hurricanes. Did you misrepresent the information you gave to the government of Puerto Rico about your liquidity and cash flow to get the contract awarded?
I think it's very important for the people of Puerto Rico to understand one very specific, simple fact. LUMA has not asked for a raise. This happens constantly that people are saying that LUMA has raised rate. Since LUMA started, it stayed with its commitment of not raising rates. What happens is fuel costs change. LUMA has nothing to do with fuel costs, does not purchase fuel, does not benefit from that process. LUMA has not raised rates one time, and as a matter of fact, the rates that you're talking about have also gone down 7 times since LUMA has been there. Again, has nothing to do with LUMA. It has to do with the cost of fuel.
Mr. Saka, did you misrepresent the information you gave the government of Puerto Rico about your liquidity and cash flow to get the contract awarded? Yes or no?
LUMA has not misrepresented any information provided to the government of Puerto Rico.
My time expires, Madam Chair.
Well, I'm going to call on Mr. Stauber for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Hageman. Access to affordable, reliable electricity is something all Americans need and something all Americans deserve. The increasing challenges that the people of Puerto Rico have faced in recent years are the result of mismanagement and lack of investing spanning several decades, which has only been exacerbated by natural disasters in recent years. I want to thank the chairwoman for calling this hearing, as well as commend the leadership of my friend and colleague, Representative González Colón, for her steadfast commitment to addressing these challenges on behalf of her constituents. Accordingly, I want to yield my rest of my time to Representative González Colón. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stover. I want to make a question to PREP. We know that in prior occasions, PREP has refused adjustments submitted by LUMA. Does the PREP reaffirm that the capital expenditure budget should be $110 million instead of the $200 million? No, I'm talking to PREP.
Yes, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. You refuse adjustments submitted by LUMA in prior occasions. And does you reaffirm that the capital expenditure budget should be $110 million instead of $200 million?
Yes, we approve the budgets for all the 3 entities, PREPA, GENERA, and LUMA, and we make an evaluation of the projects and the line items, and that's how we approve those projects.
So you believe it's 110 instead of 200?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe it's appropriate that an operator who is not delivering on their end of the deal should continue to ask for rate increases?
LUMA has not requested a rate increase. What they have requested is reconciliation of the fuel cost adjustment and the power purchase adjustment, and that comes from GENERA, the request of the fuel cost. And what we do is we analyze those requests and those documents, and then we make a determination if they apply or don't apply.
Do you or your agency keep track and a timeline of LUMA's compliance or lack of thereof with the Puerto Rico energy policy?
Yes, we do keep with their compliance with our orders that we issue.
I mean, in the case of Puerto Rico, just to make the record clear, the Energy Information Agency statistics show that Puerto Rico, the system average interruption duration index is 2020. Under PREPA, because everybody is talking about PREPA, 3 years after Maria was 1,243 minutes, the interruption, the average interruption. And in 2023, under LUMA, and another 3 years later, it was 1,448 minutes. It's over 4 times the national index, even for years with major disasters, and more than that before you took the administration of the grid. The same statistics shows that the system average interruption frequency index is about 7.8 per customer per year, 7 times the U.S. median. Anyone in Puerto Rico will tell you their experience just in August. And
Important to put into context that we cannot ignore.
The context is, do you believe that you're delivering the service you were contracted for, yes or no?
Progress is being made every day. We continue to address vegetation. We have installed automated devices.
I will take that as a no. And because at least you're not meeting the consumer's expectations. Question will be, who are you accountable to? Who's supposed to keep and follow the metrics of your contract compliance?
LUMA is the most regulated utility that I know of in the entire United States. We have our contract obligation
to who you are accountable to.
with P3A for the contract obligations.
P3?
With the regulator, the
PREP.
for any of the regulatory matters. In addition to that, of course, there's the FOMB that, is part of that process.
So
And-
those three are your bosses. They're supposed to be the ones with the power to make you comply. P3, PREP, and FOMB.
Correct.
And I think my time has expired, Madam Chair.
Well, I'm going to call on Ms. Gonzalez Colon for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. Mr. Saka, of permanent work projects under FEMA or CDBG that your company has submitted for approval, what total amount do they represent?
What we have submitted for approval?
Yes.
Okay, so we've submitted 12.3 billion in projects. Out of those, in execution or already completed is 2.3 billion, or about 18% of the 12.3 billion.
How much has been approved by FEMA?
So we have been reimbursed 173 million. We also have received 418 million of working capital advances.
Yeah, but that's another thing. So you just received 173 million
173 million have been reimbursed.
reimbursed. And how much has been approved?
So we have in obligations about 171 projects obligated and approved.
How much money you've been approved? If you don't have the data, please
One-
submit it.
1.1 billion.
1.1 billion.
1.1 billion, correct.
So you submitted 12.3 billion in projects, and you only been approved 1.1 billion. How much has
So we have spent 1.3 billion. We have 552 million spent pending obligation. Another 352 million submitted in RFPs, in our RFRs.
how much actual expenditure has your company billed for you to obtain reimbursement?
So we have incurred in cost 1.
Billions that you asked for projects. How much has been actually paid out? The 173 million and the 400 million for capital expenditures?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How much is actually being paid out?
Okay, so out of the 1.3 billion of cost incurred, we have paid out to suppliers around $1 billion.
Mr. Laboy from Core 3, do your numbers coincide with their numbers?
No, some of the numbers are not necessarily the ones that
Can
we
you
have.
clarify?
Yes, so first, I need to recognize that there's been some improvements on the Genera
That's
LUMA
not the
side.
question. I'm asking you
Yes.
about the numbers.
So far, FEMA has obligated $5.8 billion total for the electrical grid. Of those, the majority are for transmission and distribution, for engineering and architectural services, and also to purchase equipment in advance. Of that, like Mr. Saka said, 171 are related to LUMA, of which the majority have requested an advance of money related to the working capital advance. Of the 300 plus million that LUMA has mentioned about requests for reimbursements, the immense majority are related to reconcile advances. So it's only about $10 million, actual numbers for new money to be reimbursed.
Thank you. Mr. Saka, we keep talking about the vegetation clearing, and we have these discussions before. And LUMA repeatedly speak about that there are $1.2 billion set aside for that from FEMA. But the reality is only $18 million are being approved, hasn't it?
We have one project obligated which is around 18 million. There should be another 5 projects that will be obligated between now and the end of the
Right
year.
now, today, just $18 million has been approved, hasn't it?
That is correct.
That's
For the first project, which is San Juan.
So from $1.2 billion that you're claiming FEMA approved, just $18 million are being approved. Has LUMA obligated the $1.2 billion for clearing vegetation?
So we've only have 1 project obligated. We estimate that the total cost will be $1.2 billion. And for everyone's just reminding is that the way it works is that nothing is really approved by FEMA until you submit the documentation in order to be reimbursed.
Before my time expired, when you contracted with Puerto Rico, you knew that we are a tropical island, I assume, and that in a tropical island, it rains almost every day. So the vegetation will grow. And when you're saying you're going to be doing a clearing of the vegetation for 3 years, taking into account the maintenance, the system and the lines need to have vegetation crossing the lines. $1.2 billion clearing vegetation. It's like once you cut the tree, it's not going to grow again in a few weeks on the island. That's not real. So again, I think the people of Puerto Rico had it with you, with your company. I had it too. I think LUMA should go. Madam Chair.
Thank you. And the chair now calls on Mr. Valadeo for 5 minutes of questioning.
To yield my time to Representative Gonzalez Colon, Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. A few minutes ago, we were talking about that people from GENERA were saying that we're having 50% oil and 50% LNG as a production, and I need to correct the record. The Energy Information System Agency for 2022 said that 63% of the island generation is oil, 23% is gas, 8% is coal, and 6% renewables. That's the data of 2022. So I just need to correct the record in terms of it's not 50% LNG and not 50% oil. Is that correct?
Thank you for your question. I am very familiar with the stats that you're giving, so let's go with that. Just to clarify, what I was speaking about was as to the 60%.
Are those
Yes,
those the numbers of 2022? The
Yes.
ones that are again?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
And in that renewables of 6% at a time, I believe 7% at this time, 2.8 are from photovoltaic power, 2.1 for hydro, and 1.75% wind. Is that correct? That's the composition of the renewables right now.
Yes.
Okay. And you understand as well that the law in Puerto Rico, Law 19 Act, places some percentage of energy renewables goals for the year 2025, 2024, 2050. For 2025, it says renewables should be 40%. My question will be, with the current statistics on renewable, with 7%, is Puerto Rico going to meet the 40% goal for the next year? Yes or no?
Thank you for your question. I do not believe it will.
Okay. The law says as well that 60% of renewables should be reached to 2040. At the current percentage of 7% of renewables, do you believe that we're going to achieve the goal in 2040 of having 60% of renewables?
I don't believe you will.
So I'm going to make the same question will be in the 2050, 100% of renewables. No, the answer is no. In order to get, and I believe everybody here wants renewables. I want renewables as well. I mean, everybody should move to a cleaner energy for the sake of the island. Most of the people who actually go to that goal of renewables transition with LNG to get there. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How much really the people of Puerto Rico and GENERA can move to LNG in the next 3-4 years to get the maximum capacity of generation going from oil, from burning bunker C oil to LNG? How much is really achievable in your perspective?
Thank you for your question. I think in a situation where people are aligned and working together on sort of a common plan, in a 4-year period, I believe that you can get rid of the diesel and the HFO that is being burned currently, and that you will move to a situation where you can power the dispatchable generation on natural gas.
How much it will take to construct a new plant, a new LNG plant in Puerto Rico? How long it would take? Getting all the permitting, the filing. Do you actually, let me rephrase my question. Have you submitted any permitting request to any federal or local agency for a construction of a new plant in Puerto Rico?
Thank you for your question. We have submitted permit requests for the conversion of existing.
Which one?
Absolutely. The what people would refer to as the megagens in Palo Seco,
When do you submit that?
Mayaguez, and then Cambalache as well.
3. So you submitted 3 change, Cambalache, Mayaguez, and Palo Seco.
That's correct. To the various authorities, PREB included, as well as
And the federal agencies as well.
local permitting agencies.
And when do you submitted those requests?
I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but I can get them to you. But in the past 4 months.
In the past 4 months.
That's correct.
And how much is the average of construction saying that those permits were granted and approved? How much will take the actual construction or conversion of those plants from burning sea oil to LNG?
Thank you for your question. With respect to the megagens, 0. So if there were a piece of paper today that from the regulatory authorities saying that it was okay to operate on natural gas, then tomorrow you could have the megagens operate on natural gas and no longer burn diesel at approximately a $17 million savings per year.
You're talking about the 3 plants, Cambalache, Mayaguez, and Palo Seco. So if you are approved tomorrow those plants can be converted.
So specifically, I was referring to the one at Palo Seco. With respect to Mayaguez and Cambalache, between the two, it's a 6-month process. So for example, if you received the paper that you needed today, then in a 6-month period, all 3 would be done, and the annual savings for that would be approximately $72 million a year to the ratepayers of Puerto Rico forever.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Moylan for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, and also like to thank the subcommittee for holding this important hearing. It's obvious and imperative that reliable, affordable energy is delivered to residents and territories. The territories, as I've heard many times now today, are often have a high cost of fuel, right? And the territories often face high cost and low reliability. And load shedding is all too common experience both in Puerto Rico and in Guam as a territory. I want to also thank the panel for their questions that they answered for us. But I think it's clear that first off, we've got to get rid of this red tape, cut down the vegetation right away. Second, we got to go back to increasing the generation as soon as possible. And it's obvious we got to gasify just part of that, of the electric grid through new LNG terminals and gas-fired generations. Get that done as quickly as possible. And why? Because we're praying that the next storm doesn't come. And unless we get this done right away, I don't know what's going to happen. But I think it's important that we continue this conversation, and I'd like to yield the balance of my time.
Would you yield just a minute or so to me?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Moylan. LNG exports had an impact on Puerto Rico? Were you aware that the Biden-Harris administration has imposed a moratorium on LNG exports from the United States. Were you aware of that?
Madam Chair, if I may, Puerto Rico does not export LNG. We
Okay, but
import.
we've talked about that, being able to, I'm just asking if that moratorium has had an impact on Puerto Rico. No?
Thank you for your question. I'm happy to field that. I think two important distinctions. One, I think any restriction of LNG exports from the United States, sort of by definition, increases the price of LNG in the market because there's less supply. So in that respect, I think there's a negative impact. I think the other impact that's sort of worth calling out is the Jones Act restriction that prevents U.S. LNG from ending up in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
So at the current moment, there is no U.S. LNG that ends up in Puerto Rico, which I think also has a negative price impact to the ratepayers.
Okay. Has gone up with this moratorium.
I think it's fair to say that with less supply in the market, that the worldwide prices would be higher.
Mr. Moylan.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Moylan. We've been talking here, PREP and GENERA, about the capacity of the generation on the island. Puerto Rico may face 18 to 24 months of being short of peak capacity reserve until the new installations are completed. Therefore, the island needs fast development of reliable generation capacity to meet the full demand now. I know that additional mobile LNG units will be the fastest for short term. However, it is true they will have lesser economy of scale. And this alternative also mean to fast track the removal of one or more existing obsolete units and installing new technology units integrated with batteries for stabilization and backup in the same footprint of the old units. And even when Puerto Rico may fast track its own permitting, will this require a federal champion to clear hurdles from federal regulations? There's other options that are being explored. The P3's authorities is evaluating a 300 megawatts project for LNG and hydrogen and flex fuel plant. And the Department of Energy Loan Projects Office has also supported initiative for private central utility scale storage and renewables for one of the existing private generators, IS. How is this need being addressed, and how we do not make the people of Puerto Rico wait for 2 years for having stable electricity? And this question is for GENERA. Are there any plans that can be put into motion now so we don't lack of generation in the next months?
Thank you for your question. I will start by saying the number one issue that we talk about in GENERA every day is how to increase reliable generation today. You know, I think it's very clear how to do it long term, but how do you do it today? So I would say specifically, there is a tool available. The Army Corps has a $5 billion contract that they put in place specifically targeted at Puerto Rico, under which they are able to deploy fast power. The Army Corps also successfully did it in 2022 and 23, 350 megawatts in a 120-day period. I would note that one of the biggest reasons that it was so fast is because there was a high degree of coordination with the federal agencies, in particular EPA and some of the other issues that we've been talking about today, to have a very streamlined process. So as a strategy matter, you can replicate the exact project that was done earlier using an existing vehicle and an existing mechanism with the same team, and you can potentially deploy
Chair,
565
time expired.
megawatts, which would cover the gap in capacity for a 24-month period until new resources were available.
The chair now recognizes Representative Jimenez for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Carlos Jimenez. I represent Florida's 28th Congressional District, which is parts of Miami and the Keys. And it's the closest congressional district on the continental United States to the island of Puerto Rico. Also represent about 70% Hispanics in my district, many of which come from the island. And I'm here to support my dear friend, Congresswoman Jenniffer González of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is an essential part of the United States of America, and we're so proud of the countless contributions of the Puerto Rican people to our nation and the island's strategic role as a gateway to the Caribbean and the region. The over 3 million U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico deserve reliable energy. It's why I support Congresswoman González's push for more federal support and oversight of the island's electrical grid. Disruptions in service cause harm to businesses, increase operating costs, and are costly for the thousands of families who have to rely on generators as a source of power. We have allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to modernize and rebuild Puerto Rico's power grid in the aftermath of hurricanes, earthquakes, and natural disasters that have devastated the island in recent years. The people of Puerto Rico are proud Americans, and America must fully invest and must be fully invested and committed to the successful economic development of the island. A reliable, modern, and sustainable power grid is a crucial part of it. Por eso apoyo los esfuerzos de nuestra congresista Jenniffer González para resolver el problema de mejorar el sistema energético en la isla. Jenniffer es una gran líder que respetamos en el Congreso porque lucha por el pueblo de Puerto Rico y nos educa sobre cómo podemos seguir ayudando a los 3 millones de ciudadanos americanos que viven en la isla. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time to Ms. González.
Thank you, Mr. Jimenez, and thank you for always supporting Puerto Rico in all legislations. I have a question for Mr. Saka. LUMA, as the transmission and distribution operator, must be lead in developing any updates to the Integrated Resources Plan, which must be revised every 3 years. And this was due on June 28th of this year. But your company requested an extension to May 2025 and conceded that extension to November 28th of 2024 for the preliminary submission and February 28th of next year to complete the IRP. My question, Mr. Saka, will be, when the last IRP was approved in 2021, it was known that it needed to be renewed in 2024. What's the excuse not to be ready for?
Thank you for your question. The IRP is a process that requires quite a bit of data gathering, quite a bit of interaction with multiple stakeholders, and quite a bit of technology in order to be able to address a very complex situation, whether it's the generation aspect of it, the transmission and distribution system, and how to make it more effective. Along the way, we have found that it's been quite difficult to get all of the data to make sense and requires a bit more study.
Even when the millions of dollars in contract. So to the PREP, what will be the consequences to LUMA if the deadline is not met?
Last week, we had a technical conference to discuss the reasons why they can't comply with that November 29 deadline. I can't answer that question because right now we're deliberating our response to that.
But what's the consequences of not complying with the deadline?
It could be either fines for not complying with our order, and that would be the main consequence. And delaying, of course, the IRP process.
Mr. Laboy, how much has PREPA and Core 3 fronted from LUMA projects that must be recovered by FEMA?
So far, we have disbursed about $1.3 billion of authorized money based on FEMA obligations.
How much more is still pending to be recovered?
Say that again, please.
How much is still pending to be recovered?
So we can disburse based on two things. Number one, FEMA obligating scopes of work that are submitted by LUMA and GENERA, Once that happens, we have authorization to actually
How much still
disperse.
pending? You don't have the don't have the number here. You
No.
can submit it to the committee.
No, we
How
do.
much is
Yeah.
left in terms of reserve?
Madam Chair. Time has
We can
My-
just,
my-
well, I
my
will allow
time-
the witness to answer, but then we need to wrap up.
Okay, so for the things that we manage the federal funds, right? FEMA has obligated $9.5 billion, but duly authorized for construction and disbursements is $5.8 billion. Of that, we have advanced pretty much 26% based on the request from LUMA and GENERA.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I will submit questions for the record.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, an unanimous consent request, please. To submit for the record, the Department of Energy's Puerto Rico 100 study that found that Puerto Rico can reach 100% renewables by 2050.
Without objection. I want to thank the witnesses for the valuable testimony and also to all of the members for their questions today. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask for you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit those questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, October 1st, 2024. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.